afternoon, good morning. Thank you for joining us today on our very special eDiscovery Day discussion on the tipping point of new technology in discovery. Today I'm extremely excited. I'm very grateful to be joined by such an esteemed and knowledgeable panel of guests to help me explore this topic from all sides of the discussion. From the judiciary, we have the Honourable Xavier Rodriguez. Judge is a district judge from the Western District of Texas, and we're very excited to have you with us today. So welcome, Judge.
Well, thank you, Angela.
We also have Craig Ball. Many of us know Craig as a special master, an industry commentator, and an expert attorney and technologist in forensics. So welcome, Craig. Very excited to have you.
It's a pleasure to be working with you, Angela.
Thank you. And we also have Scott Cohen. Scott is an eDiscovery specialist and thought leader in our space, and he is the Director of eDiscovery and Information Governance Services over at Winston Strawn. So welcome, Scott.
Thank you, Angela. I'm happy to be here.
And of course, my name's Angela Bunting. I'm the Vice President of eDiscovery over here at Nuix. So let's kick off. 2016, it's been an exciting year for us in technology and in legal circles. Artificial intelligence, or AI, or machine learning, in all its wondrous permutations, has seemingly marched on the practice of law and is helping transform the legal practice landscape forever. For lawyers and legal professionals alike, it might seem like the practice of law is leading the AI revolution. But the driver for much of this change is the way we work and interact as a society. The way we collaborate and are productive in our lives is changing the way we do business. The anywhere, anytime digital communication devices have enabled us to fit more into our workdays than any other previous generation. No longer is the business record of today just an email like it was when replaced formal paper communications. Technology today is again disrupting the way we collaborate and are productive in our lives, and thus the way we're doing business. A little earlier this year, while researching for a new paper I did with Scott, we looked into just what sort of change we were seeing in society and the way we were working. And I have to say, I was really quite surprised by the numbers. So we thought we'd share a few of those with you today. So, 2007, that's when we all know when Google did its general public launch of its Gmail service. It started in 2004 back as an invitation-only beta. So really in, 11 years? They're now up to 900 million active users. 75% of those are actually on devices, so mobiles, tablets, anything that is not tied down, and only 25%, I guess, are on standard non-mobile devices or standard computers. If we have a look at the mobile phone usage trends, again, in 10 years we're sort of seeing a massive jump. Text messages were always one of those things that a lot of us were sending, but as you can see now, just about everyone sends text messages. But it was really around the extra services that phones or mobile devices can offer these days that was quite startling. So back in 2005, hardly anyone, or 5%, were using their phones for email. Now today we're sort of sitting up around the 52%. And using VoIP, or voice over IP technology, so phone calls and the like, was non-existent in 2005 virtually. But now today, even in the last year, we sort of jumped huge numbers, from 27% up to 43%. If we have a look at the growth of instant messaging at the same time, again, it's sort of that parallel growth, so that the mobile technology, or that anytime, anywhere technology is really enabling us to really fit more into our day. Now, if I think of Nuix, and the platforms that we leverage as a business, again, it's quite a startling revelation, I guess. We're a global 24/7 company. I think there's about an 8-hour spot on a Sunday that we probably don't always log on, but we're using tools such as Slack, Skype, HipChat to help our groups communicate and get out of our inboxes. We're using tools like Confluence, Evernote and Asana. They're great productivity tools, and we have a range of those for the different teams that are working around the world, depending on their preference and the types of data that they're actually storing. Both of these sets of tools allow us to remove ourselves from our inbox, place notes, place documents, share documents, but also record videos and record voicemails, etc., to be able to communicate when we're sort of on the opposite side of the world. We also do a lot of work in recorded scenarios. So we use WebEx, we use Hangouts, and this is really around the way we're global and being able to allow people to catch up on a meeting if they have to. So we typically don't type out minutes anymore. We'll instead record our trainings, record our minutes, and therefore our business documents become videos and recordings around the world. And look, we haven't even started to go into some of the more specific type collaboration platforms that are starting to emerge. And things like Bloomberg Professional that has everything from chats to feeds to document exchanges, and ThreadKM, a lot of us saw that at ILTA last year, a wonderful collaboration tool and knowledge management tool for the legal industry. All of these items are helping us fit more into our day and have that connection with our colleagues. But they are going to present quite a few challenges for the eDiscovery professional of tomorrow. So today, what we thought we'd do is we'd run through a scenario, and hence the esteemed panel that I have with me today. And we have the judiciary, we have the special master, and we have the eDiscovery expert who's constantly preparing productions for the other side. And this really came about based off a question, a late night question I posed to Craig recently, and you can read the full transcribe of what we wrote on Craig's blog. But we wanted to take you through that scenario because it produced quite an interesting discussion, and really it's a grey area in law today because there isn't too many precedents that have taken us forward in this space. And so the scenario today is that ABC Court has a variety of audio files in their systems. So a bit like us, minutes, meetings, corporate voicemails, your individual voicemails on phones and devices. And we're looking at some of the emerging technologies that use artificial intelligence to start to transcribe or translate what is said. So, and we thought we'd also put in that ABC Corp is being sued for $10 million. And so starting off, Scott, let's start with you. As the person who's preparing the production for this scenario, what is your firm's philosophy for ensuring audio is processed like any other file so it can be considered for potential relevance? Do you supply the transcribed text for those files to the other side if they're relevant?
Well, Angela, that's a complicated question, and I'm going to speak not for my firm, but just my own opinion on the advice that I would provide lawyers when facing a situation. There are several factors that one has to consider before making such a decision, volume chiefly among them. Transcribing a low volume of material might not be an issue and therefore may serve to head off further disputes and make things easier for everyone else. But under most circumstances, I wouldn't advise producing transcripts unless there was a compelling reason to do so. And recognizing that a receiving party could request such a format, then we'd be obligated to address it, to meet that requirement, or to argue and negotiate that whatever the issues with that format of production might include. But if we agree, and by the way, this is a discussion that really ought to take place very early on in the discovery process. It's not something that people should just make on their own, because there are inherent flaws with audio systems. There are things that really confound the eDiscovery process. But like I said, the receiving party could request it. We'd have to consider it and raise any issues that that might need to be raised using the normal process of raising such issues. Now, if we're aware that the material under examination may contain information that the other side wouldn't be entitled to, obviously producing raw audio is not an option, and so, you know, in that situation, we'd have to find some other means, and that could include transcripts. Some of the audio analysis systems these days have capabilities to do the equivalent of a redaction, but not all of them, and they can be expensive to use. So we'd really have to look at what the capabilities of our systems would be and what the specific situation requires. And again, just to reiterate, I would want to manage expectations by raising the inherent technical challenges of audio transcription in a discussion such as a meet and confer, because they're not always known or apparent, especially by receiving parties.
Great. Great. Well, I guess the other thing is knowing that any technology around these types of files, it's fairly new into the market using artificial intelligence that's driving this. You know, even manual transcriptions aren't perfect. You know, OCR, as an example, you know, it starts at 97%, even for the best of documents. It's a 3% margin. So what do you feel would be the acceptable level of accuracy, in your opinion, to run these materials through, say, an automatically transcribed system or an automatically translation?
Well, I apologize for this, but that too is a complicated question, doesn't have a specific answer. I'm glad you used the example of OCR, because in OCR's early days, its reliability was questionable, and it was really hard to determine whether or not a particular project, you know, what the level of quality associated with a particular project was. Certainly, the system couldn't report it reliably. So I think that I didn't think then, and I don't think now, that it's possible to specify a percentage. By the way, it's really difficult with the audio systems today to figure out what that percentage would be without doing a one-by-one comparison, which presumably is what people are trying to avoid in the first place. Also, recognizing that the degree of accuracy needed is different in every case, I think a better strategy is for the producing party to sample the data the way we did with OCR as part of the QC process before production, address any issues that are detected, and then make the production. And after production, it's now in the hands of the receiving party to determine if what they've been provided with is adequate, and if they feel that it isn't, they have means that they can take to address those issues. I don't think specifying any percentage is really advisable, because, you know, it's an arbitrary number, and it may lead to even further disputes that may not be as easily resolved.
Great. And yes, it is a complicated area, so I appreciate that you've tackled all sides of that. So Craig, you're a special eDiscovery master, and today, I'm very sorry, but we're going to make you our plaintiff in this case. You've received Scott's disclosure. You've determined that you're missing, say, 3 out of 10 critical audio files where the terms of the deals were set out over voicemail. You know this because your client has kept copies, and you were looking for them in the exchange. So you've challenged the disclosure with a motion to compel, saying that it's incomplete under Rule 26. Must Scott go back and manually transcribe all his audio, or get his team to re-listen to all that audio again? In your experience with less accurate OCR as a special master, would you expect the responding party to manually transcribe all their documents, or just re-OCR them, perhaps with a better tool? Is there any case law on this?
Well, let me break that down a little bit. A lot of questions in there. Let's start with the foundation here. Before we begin comparing to OCR, although that's a helpful comparison in certain respects, we have to remember that we don't have a meaningful alternative to take paper documents and make them electronically searchable other than OCR. So it's not a question of whether we use OCR or something else, which the only something else would be human beings manually rekeying in the data, which carries with it its own substantial risk of error and high cost. So we look at OCR and say, okay, what's the best OCR we can use? If OCR is coming in around 90%, so you have 10% of errors on the page versus 97%, certainly I would reject someone electing to use 90% OCR versus 97% OCR, which is much more in line with the industry standard. But then again, we have functionally no real alternative. Now let's look at what our alternatives would be for voice transcription. We have essentially 4 that jump to mind. One is you produce the audio without any recreation of its textual content, no transcription at all. Scott raised some very wise points about redaction, but even if we set aside redaction, the problem with providing audio that way is that you can't really search it very effectively. There are some expensive and challenging phonemic methods that have been around for a while, but ultimately we want to be able to use text-based tools on it, not phonemic tools, because all of the tools we think of today, whether it be the review tools in eDiscovery or the advanced analytics that make up TAR, these are all plain text-based. So we want a transcript. Well, we can get a transcript by sending it offshore and having people listen to it and transcribe it, and they'll get a very high level of accuracy. Human beings do an excellent job of listening to sounds and turning them into typed words, and we see that and use it every day, of course, with court reporters. But there's something new in this space, and the new thing is highly accurate and extremely fast and relatively low-cost robotic or automatic transcription, so that you can take a bunch of sound files, you can have them processed at way faster than real time and generate a fairly accurate transcript. Now, fairly accurate isn't going to be perhaps 97%. Voice is hard, particularly when people talk at the same time or you are in a noisy environment. Anyone who's ever worked on the criminal side and dealt with wiretaps understands just how challenging turning voice into transcripts can be. But on the other hand, it can do it cheaply and very fast, making, in a sense, many things that you would have dumped in an audio format or simply found a reason to ignore as not reasonably accessible or too burdensome. Now you can do it quickly and cheaply and have a kind of rough and ready transcript. And so what we're looking at here is if that margin of error, if we just making up a number, say that a transcription by machine is 90% accurate, and again, I want to emphasize I'm just pulling that number out of thin air, and Angela, if you have a better number, we can certainly use it for discussion. I am now in the role of the requesting party in possession of some of the recordings, whether they be voicemails or transcripts of board meetings or customer service phone calls or complaints, what have you. For whatever reason, in a Laura Zubalake-like situation, when my client left the company, my client took with him or her a number of these items, and so we have a way of proving that material, unique, and relevant information is not being captured by this process. Is that right, Angela?
It is. It is.
Okay. So I've come forward and I'm showing the judge, they're using this transcription method that's cheap to them and fast, and we like that, but they have an alternative that's going to bring us, most, let's say, of 10 items, they're losing 3 or 4 of them, and I have 3 or 4 from that group, and I can show you that that's the level of error, that of material responsive items that they're missing, say, 30 to 40% of them in terms of the returns of relevant documents, and I can show you compelling examples of that. So what I want to force them to do is to go back to the drawing board and, now first of all, you're making me the bad guy here, and I'm okay with that. I am the plaintiff's lawyer. So I'm now asking the court to scrap it all and have them start from scratch and retranscribe everything manually. That's not what I would do in reality, Angela. In reality, I would look for a hybrid solution. I would look for a mechanism of trying to identify the high responsive documents, sample them, or have some significant subset of these items transcribed to make a determination that the alternate method that I am proposing is going to perform significantly better than the cheap, fast method, because if I don't come to the court with metrics demonstrating not only that things are being missed, but that the expensive alternative is going to catch them, I've only brought half of the necessary proof forward. Now that was hopefully answered some part of some of the questions. You can tell me what I've missed and I'll try to jump on those.
No, I mean, that's fine. You've certainly said that in this case, maybe a hybrid solution, but you're going to ask Scott to go back to the drawing board. But I do want to point out that you raised quite an interesting question, both you and Scott, in that audio is tricky. It's one of those things that I guess in the past has been maybe a few jokes in inboxes or things that people have traditionally gone, well, we're not going to have relevant material in there. And the first alternative that you've said is just produce them. But as Scott rightly pointed out, how do you know they're relevant if you haven't sat and listened to them? Lawyers don't like to sit there and listen to hours upon hours themselves. That can put them to sleep. And then you've got the point of privilege. So looking for an alternative is certainly something that is needed in the industry, especially as these become very much a discoverable file, or always have been, but very much discoverable if they're relevant to the matter at hand.
One of the first things you raised was it might not be relevant. And that's been the excuse of sorts that's been used for years to trivialize evidence that's recorded by audio. Increasingly, we're going to see more and more real-time audio. There's a lot more being recorded. We're going to see it as audio accompanying all of the onslaught of video that is out there. In order to make that video searchable, we're going to have to pick up that audio track and make it text searchable. But I just want to emphasize before we move on that in this hypothetical, you've made it clear that the information is patently relevant and material. It's key to the case. So we don't have to concern ourselves with speculating that maybe it's not important. It's not only is important by stipulation, but I'm able to bring forward examples of significant and material, if you will, smoking gun documents that the cheaper, faster system is missing.
Absolutely. Judge, can we turn to you now and say, look, do you think that level of burden should be put on Scott to redo his production, potentially manually transcribing the documents to ensure the highest level of accuracy?
Yeah, but before I answer that question, Scott earlier on started talking about the preservation obligations of audio, and the only thing I wanted to chime in on that point is, if you're looking at already at the point that you've already been served with litigation, you're probably thinking about this topic a little bit too late. And so optimally, you want to do some kind of data mapping, understanding where your relevant evidence may be deposited to include, digital audio and voicemails and those type of things. So optimally, you're thinking about this well ahead of the trigger date for preservation. So now we've been hit with discovery requests in this hypothetical, and so we know there's some missing files or inadequate files, so Craig wants a reproduction by the producing party. So your court's going to get hit with a number of things here. Under Rule 26B, we're supposed to look at not only relevancy, but relevancy and proportionality. And so there's a whole bunch of factors there that are given to us in 26B1 about how we're supposed to look at proportionality. And to me, I always start off with the importance of the discovery in resolving the issue. So I'd be asking myself in this hypothetical, well, Craig, your client has those three that you were looking for. What do you believe is going to be in the rest of the audio, and how critical is that evidence going to be to whatever your causes of action are that you have pled? And so we're sort of looking at now marginal utility analysis. How much more do we think the producing party should expend in discovery and what are they going to get out of that? And so I'm anticipating what Craig's going to be arguing was, well, there's errors here, and the error rate here is insufficient. And so, you know, what is the accuracy rate that we're looking for here? And the courts have not really opined on this issue yet. Now, instead of looking at OCR, I would look at the analogy here being predictive coding or TAR. And so predictive coding or TAR normally hits about 90% accuracy or recall rates. And we know that a couple of courts have approved as low as 75% recall rates as still being satisfactory. And so I'd be wondering, well, you know, are we hitting those kind of thresholds, or are we still far below? I'm looking at marginal utility. What more is Craig going to get out of any more missing files? You know, the other thing too that I'm having difficulty with just procedurally is, you know, the producing party is not generally required to do production plus. And what I mean in this context is, I mean, the producing party would generally be only required to produce the audio files. They're under no obligation to produce transcripts of those audio files. And but you're left with the burden now on the producing party. Well, do we just want to give audio files unredacted, and is there going to be privileged material there, confidential material, financial info that we don't want to have let loose? And so we've got all sorts of issues going on in this hypothetical. Do I make him redo? I want to hear from Craig. What are you going to get out of it?
One thing we should add, though, is the mechanism that they're presumably using to search this voluminous material is probably textual keywords, and so just turning over the audio file without creating some kind of transcript necessitates that human beings have to sit and listen to it in real time. Now, if we have thousands of hours of audio that can be mechanically transcribed in a day or so and allow it to be searchable by more conventional textual means, I don't think it's not just a question of form of production, and it's not a question of, well, I want more than the original, so give me text too. Extracting the text is an essential part of the process for identifying potentially relevant documents.
Yeah, no, I hear the argument. I go back, I guess, to the rules itself. I mean, I don't know how under our current rules I'm requiring Scott to reproduce with text. Now I of course see the merits of doing this faster and cheaper, and so an automatic or robotic transcription makes perfect sense. But if you're going to complain about the accuracy rate on that, I'm sort of stuck with, okay, well, who's going to bear the cost of this? And so the rules tell me a couple of things as a judge. They tell me if the discovery sought is unreasonably cumulative or duplicative, or if it can be obtained from other sources that are more convenient, less burdensome, or less expensive, I must, on my own, sua sponte, ensure that we've got some proportionality here applied to this. And so I'm left with, well, can I force Scott under the rules as written here to reproduce at that full expense? I go back to, I'm going to require you to tell me what marginal utility are you going to get out of this extra production.
That's exactly why I think it's important to get in front of these issues right at the start. I know that we're not under any obligation to produce in any format that, there's no requirement that we produce in one superior format over another, but there is this notion of the requesting party asking for something. We have to negotiate, and if there are inherent issues with the format that the requesting party is asking for, I'm sure you both agree, it makes much more sense to get those out on the table before you do the production than afterwards, and so that the judge doesn't have to settle the dispute that he just described.
Quickly, gentlemen, the judge has brought up a very interesting point there, and that's Discovery Plus. At what point in OCR, in our sort of eDiscovery history, did we say that it's a must to produce the text that sits behind, say, a scanned PDF? When do we find that tipping point to say, well, there is the text option for audio or a translation option for audio. And I used it as part of my coming to the table with my production. Why shouldn't the other party expect that when we expect that of every other file we produce?
Why is it these conversations always get sort of turned upside down? My frustration is now the plaintiff is being seen to be greedy by asking for something the defendant doesn't want to do. But that's not the hypothetical. Like my law students, everyone wants to change the hypothetical. Here we have a situation where presumably Scott beforehand, in dealing with this kind of information, only had two options available to him. The third is of simply pretending it doesn't exist in this case is not an option. So either someone had to listen to it in real time, so 100 lawyers working 1,000 hours each to listen to 100,000 hours of tape, not a starter, or to send it offshore for manual translation, but that costs, say, 10 times more than this. So Scott had been presumably doing that in the past, and that was presumably bringing up the responsive things when he ran keywords against the data to find what was being sought. Now Scott has sold this new technology that can do the 100,000 hours of transcription and do it for a fraction of the price, and importantly can do it very, very quickly. Many, many benefits there, but the trade-off is that we're now losing 3 to 4 of 10 relevant and material documents. That's the hypothetical, and it's not the plaintiff saying, Scott, you have to give me transcripts of these non-textual things. Scott has to make transcripts because his tools won't work with anything else.
Craig, let me go back to my TAR or predictive coding analogy. I mean, if courts have said that 75% recall rate is satisfactory in the predictive coding or TAR concept, meaning the producing party is still not being put under any obligation to produce anything near 90%. I mean, at some point there's got to be some kind of proportionality applied, and rightly or wrongly, that's the threshold those courts hit. I mean, what is wrong with that analysis?
What is wrong with that analysis is this, Your Honor. We're not comparing predictive coding against manual review that's 90 to 100% accurate. We're accepting predictive coding at those kinds of recall and precision rates because it is at least as good, if not better, than the slower, more expensive manual reviews that would be its necessary alternatives. We don't have that here. We have something that's materially much worse, such that it's losing a very substantial volume of patently material and responsive documents.
And so, you know, you earlier made the comment that full transcription was highly accurate. I don't know. I've read a lot of court reporter transcripts that, you know, have word errors in them, syntax or spelling errors. I mean, if we're going to be doing keywords, we'll be missing documents there. So there's going to be some amount of error. So the big question we're all facing with is, unfortunately, is how much error is satisfactory, right? I mean, that's the question we're faced with. And yeah, and so how much are we going to, and going back to my marginal utility analysis, I mean, how much more am I going to require someone to expend to improve the error rate?
I'm sorry. The frustration I feel as a requesting party is that the game keeps changing. When I say, here, Judge, are some examples that I kept that prove that things are being omitted, then I'm told, well, you already have them, so no harm, no foul. When I prove that it does actually have a material difference in error rate, even with that fact in place, the attitude is still sort of, well, we don't really know what the error rate is. Well, we do know what the error rate is.
And
I don't think we do.
Craig, I'll flip that just quickly. If we go back to our predictive coding scenario that Judge spoke about, we know that human review rates are sort of around the 55–60% accuracy mark. In this particular scenario, unless you receive text files, could you assume that the lawyers nodded off while they were listening to the hours and hours that they were listening to if they actually did it manually themselves?
We're not going to, again, here, the hypothetical keeps going out the window, and I'm just kind of, I'm an old trial dog. I'm kind of like the facts. The facts we're given here is not that they were having people listen to them in real time. The facts would be that they were using human transcription offshore, and for whatever reason, they were very happy with the success of that process, except that it was slow and expensive. So if you want to change the hypothetical and say the machine version is not worse and all of them miss about the same documents, then yeah, you go with the faster, cheaper one. But for the hypothetical to be worth talking about, there has to be a fairly substantial difference in quality and accuracy in order to have something to balance. The judge is right. Proportionality has to be there at scope, and it has to be there throughout the process. But proportionality cannot be brought to bear without some metrics. And we're just...
And so wouldn't the metrics be, what would be the cost of this full transcription to find these missing documents, and what's the amount in controversy in this case?
Well, that's exactly. Now we're getting to somewhere, because I think when we talked about this offline, we had said this was it a, I don't know, $5 or $50 million, $5 million case, I think?
10 million.
All right, 10 million. And let's just, for argument's sakes, let's say the machine transcription's $10,000 and the offshore human transcription's $100,000. I think we use those numbers offline as well.
Craig, aren't you missing the point that the it's almost impossible to determine what the quality rate is going to be without taking some kind of measure to you know, to determine it? And I would expect a producing party, certainly, you know, we would do this. We would sample. We would try to ensure that a meaningful sample did not include any, you know, material errors, and then we've met our obligations in terms of the production. And if you find the production to be inadequate, then it becomes a discussion between ourselves or in front of the judge. Isn't that the way it's supposed to happen, regardless of what the technology used is?
Oh, sure, but assume you have the metrics. Assume you've done the sampling, you've established the reliable differential. That differential, again, for purposes of our discussion, is it costs 10 times more to do it manually. The manually is, if you will, the gold standard. It's as close to perfect as we get, and it will bring back, you know, it brought back 10 of the 10 key documents, whereas only 6 of the 10 come back with the cheaper technology. Now, we can keep assuming it's better than what we're proving, but if we work with those differentials, what's our analysis proportionality-wise?
So what about a ruling where I would say, okay, we're going to still maintain preservation of the audio files. We're going to engage in phasing and tiering of this. So you have some of these audio files already in your possession, and so why can't we engage in depositions and further discovery on your points here, and then come back to me as to, okay, based upon your depositions and other evidence here, and why do you need to go through this exercise?
Okay, we've done all that, Judge. Now we've come back to you and we've said, we've spoken with the experts on both sides. They agree that the differential is about 10 to 1 on cost, and that we lose about 30 to 40% of the material, responsive, unique documents. They're not cumulative. We're not getting enough. We're losing actual transcripts of board meetings that are on point, and I can show you the examples we have that we've painstakingly got, and everyone agrees that these are the metrics. But at a certain point, it's going to come to you to split the baby in some way, and if proportionality is going to drive it, then I say let's go through the proportionality factors if we need to. But we keep trying to deny the metrics that are assumed in the hypothetical.
Right, and so let's assume then we've gone through phasing and tiering. Craig comes back to me and says, Judge, we've gone through all this. We've taken depositions. It's uncontested that this is going to be material evidence that we're going to require to prove our causes of action. It's unique evidence. It's not duplicative. It's not cumulative. this is original stuff that we still required to possess. And then I turn to Scott and say, okay, Scott, you've got two choices. One, you turn over the audios as is because you don't have any duty to do anything else. You don't have a duty to produce transcripts. But if you want to engage in the redaction of those audios, you're going to have to go through the burdens of listening to it all, so you might as well do the full transcriptions offshore like you were doing before you decided to stop. Aren't those my only two choices left?
I think the merits of each case would certainly weigh into it, but Scott, would you be happy with that as a ruling to comply with?
It's a difficult choice to make. If we were ordered to do so, obviously there's no, we have to do it. But I think that the technology offers us some solutions to try to avoid a full-on manual review or listening to 100,000 hours of audio. I wouldn't be happy advising a case team that this is our only option.
Well, it certainly could be more desirable. Of course, it's more desirable if we could improve the accuracy to satisfy the plaintiff in this hypothetical. But there could be some other middle grounds. I mean, if the technology was that, as a result of the tiering and phasing, we became aware of specific dates that the plaintiff was now interested in, and we could limit the transcription to those kind of dates. That would be helpful in the process, and that way we could otherwise still go with the automatic or robotic transcription as to the rest of the audio. I mean, there's some ways we can still try to define and hone in.
Could we clarify some things? I'm looking at some of the questions, and I think there's a misapprehension of what we're talking about here. Some of the commenters are saying, why should Scott's client have to enhance this information? And we must make clear, no one here is saying that if Scott has audio that's just audio, that he has a burden of making it text searchable. He doesn't. Scott is facing a different situation. He has 100,000 hours of recordings. He cannot practically, simply by virtue of the time it will take to do it in real time, he cannot meet his discovery deadlines and put together a team to simply listen to it all. He has to use a technology. Further, Scott, the producing party, wants to use a text search technology because that's how their tools and workflows work. So the decision to enhance this with searchable text is not prompted by the requesting party. It's not give me something plus. It's something Scott has to do to make this data searchable for his own purposes because there's no other way he can distinguish responsive from non-responsive or privileged from not privileged. So I sense some outrage at the plaintiff requiring this, and that's not at all what's in this hypothetical.
So thanks for that, Craig. I guess one thing I did want to cover off before we run out of time today, because I think this debate's fantastic, is, Judge, I guess there's a lot of talk about the new rules under 37. Do you think Scott should be sanctioned under Rule 37 for failing to disclose all of the relevant material? For yourself, what do you think is the tipping point when new disruptive technology like automatic transcription? It's not perfect, we know that, but when does it become a reasonable alternative to manually taking care of these files and not be sanctioned?
Okay, well then there's two aspects under Rule 37, and so let's dispose of E2. There's got to be the intent to deprive, and here I'm not sure that we've seen any intent to deprive. The material's still being preserved under this hypothetical, and it's just a matter of how it's going to be produced. Some of the jurisdictions are coming pretty harsh on what it takes to have an intent to deprive standard being met. But under 37E1, here's another little difficulty with this. The ESI should have been preserved in the anticipation of litigation. Well, it's been preserved, and they've taken reasonable steps to preserve it, so you haven't met the precatory language in 37E to be sanctioned. But now where I think you could get sanctioned potentially is under Rule 26. And under Rule 26G, you had a certification you had to make that your disclosures were complete and accurate at the time. And so, obviously these things weren't complete and accurate because we still have some discussions about what you've not produced. And so I think there is some opportunity for Craig in this hypothetical to recover some monies and get some relief, but I'm not sure it's under 37.
Okay, but isn't the standard for disclosure or discovery not perfection, but reasonableness?
So, the standard is reasonableness. It goes back to the question I guess I posed earlier here. We've always allowed for some error in this. The big question is how much error is reasonable, and that's really what we've been struggling with this last hour is, what is that, and how do we gauge it? How do we analyze it, and how do we deal with it? And this is one difficult hypothetical.
The error here comes on the back of the requesting party alone. The only savings go to the producing party, and they're material savings. It's 90% of the cost, so it's a non-trivial savings. But it costs the requesting party 4 out of 10 responsive, unique, material, non-cumulative, smoking gun documents. I mean, that's our assumption. We can keep challenging that, but that's what we're told are the facts here. So, at what point then, if losing 40% of the responsive documents somehow strikes the proportionality proponents as fair and just and reasonable, then at what point, how bad does it have to get? Does it have to be you're losing half of all the documents before people start saying, no, you really have to use a better technology? And I think that's what's getting lost here is, yes, perfection is not the standard, but neither is hit or miss. Neither is, well, we'll let monkeys do it in a cage. We've got to have a certain reasonable threshold at which point the court will say, no, you can't just simply deny the other side patently material documents. This is not an intent to deprive at first, but once it's known that the system that is being used is missing almost as many as it's hitting, the continued push to use it becomes an intent to deprive for the gain that is only being realized by one side. So we're going to face this here, and we're going to face this in predictive coding pretty soon. Right now we have Judge Peck saying you can't force people to use predictive coding. But sooner or later, people are going to be saying we're getting much more responsive documents and much less junk using this method versus that method. And at a certain point, the courts will feel obliged to step in and say, you cannot use an outmoded, subpar, more costly method against a better, faster, and cheaper method. You just can't make that choice reasonably.
Yeah, I agree with Craig on that. We finally agree on something between the three of us. Under Rule 1, we're supposed to reach something that mirrors just, speedy, and inexpensive determination of the merits of the case. And so, sooner or later, we're going to have to move in that direction.
Let's hope that just.
I would just point out I would just want to point out, though, and we need to make sure that this is clear, that there could be several different reasons why the product or the production seems inadequate to the task, and it's not just the technology. And that's, I think that it would be incumbent upon the producing party to try to figure out, is the audio just so terrible that not even a human can determine what's being said, or are there other reasons or other things that can be done to make the quality better? I wouldn't just immediately jump to the human review as the only alternative. That's the point I wanted to make earlier.
Agreed. Human review is not even a meaningful alternative here, Scott. If we had 100 lawyers on this, which is a ridiculous number of lawyers, it's going to take them each 1,000 hours to do it. So it's real-time listening is a total non-starter, and for the court to just dismiss that as being unreasonable makes sense. But we do have what you'd been doing before, which costs significantly more but is as close to good as we get, and what you now want to move to, which is actually quite poor but really cheap. At a certain point, we're going to have to be in a position to say that's just not good enough. Carbon paper copies on typewriters are no longer good enough, particularly if it's the 5th carbon in the stack. And for people who are listening to this and going, what are carbons and why do you stack them? You get my point. Some things are just outmoded technology.
Gentlemen, I think we could go on and on and on with this debate. It's certainly, I think, the start of a great discussion our industry has to have, and I'm very excited that we had it on eDiscovery Day today. And look, we've only just sort of scratched the surface with one technology. Natural processing language is coming in fintech or financial technologies. It's just around the corner. There will be a lot more voice, a lot more direction from automatically described machines, AI, Siri. The ability to search consistently across a wide set of documents and do it proportionally and make sure that we're doing the best that we can will be an interesting debate as we go forward. Craig, can I ask, is there any more questions that the audience have raised that would be of interest to this debate? Or does anyone have any last thoughts before we close up today?
On the question, there are several questions about technology-assisted review. I'm going to skip over because they are kind of a different story. There is some wise suggestions made by the listeners about hybrid approaches to this. And so I hope we don't leave those off the table. The baby doesn't have to necessarily get split here. We can find ways to use the cheaper technology in some areas, perhaps the more peripheral dates and what have you of information. You see, if we were going about this in what I would consider intelligently, we would attempt to try to segregate the data into the rich and the not rich. And for those things that are very unlikely to be responsive, we would probably try to use the cheapest methodologies and in some ways try to get the best of both worlds. The most accurate transcriptions for the most relevant data, if we can find a way to discern that, and then using the cheaper technologies, the less accurate technologies on the broader and more peripheral data. We don't want to set up new and significantly cost-saving technologies to unreasonable standards so that the fights about them mean we don't get the benefit of emerging technologies. I've had to play a role that's not the one I believe here. I really think we shouldn't end this without saying that ultimately we all want these new low-cost and high-speed technologies to come into play, and we need to find paths for them to enter the legal marketplace which do not also entail a significant loss of that just part of just, speedy, and inexpensive.
And I think you're exactly right, Craig. We saw this with the trust in predictive coding that took quite a few years. We certainly, as volumes grow, don't want to lose that trust to being the just and expedited way to doing productions. And
judges are being encouraged under the advisory committee notes to Rule 26. Computer-based methods of searching is going to continue to develop, and we're told that we're to look at this continuing developments and encourage the use of that to reach just, speedy, and inexpensive. Hey, one question that somebody had about Rule 26G about, well, you're certified, and what do you do later when you found out that your certification may be inaccurate and there's incomplete responses? The best response to that is tell the other side as quickly as possible. Don't delay, because the delay then looks like cover-up. So confess early any kind of problems.
Great point. And Scott, did you have any last thoughts?
We only talked about audio, but I just want to address the vast majority of other types of technologies that are entering the eDiscovery realm you listed a few of them at the beginning of the presentation. They're all going to have or present challenges, and challenges that really equate to the challenges that we discussed today. My advice to people is to understand the strengths and weaknesses of whatever technology that you're using to handle whatever technologies that your client is using, and use that information in collaboration with your opponent to try to avoid these issues. Raising these issues earlier and getting agreement on how to handle, certainly along the lines of what the judge just said, I think makes sense. And as a technologist, I can only advise lawyers on what I think is the best approach technology-wise, but I'm hearing a lot about collaboration, and this certainly seems to be a topic or an opportunity for collaboration.
Absolutely. Collaboration is key, especially getting out there early. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for starting the discussion today, and I'm really looking forward to seeing more of this discussion, and as the case law develops and as an industry we try and embrace these new technologies to advance what we do. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope that it was an interesting presentation for yourselves, and I hope you enjoy the rest of eDiscovery Day. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.